Welcome to RevOps Revolution, where we focus on changing the game for driving revenue. Join your host, Jesse Morris, each episode to dive into different areas that drive change and revenue across real organizations. While you're thinking of it here, go ahead and pull out your app, your favorite podcast player, and hit subscribe. That way you don't miss any future episodes. Ready to get going? Let's go. Here's to the revolution.
Welcome to another day of the revolution. I am your host, Jesse Morris, and today we are fortunate enough to have one of my friends, Beau Brooks, on the podcast today. Welcome.
Great to be here, Jesse. Always good to see you.
Good to see you too, man. Thanks for joining. So Beau and I met through Pavilion a couple of years ago, I think. Is that right now?
That's right. Yeah, time flies.
Yeah, and we actually live pretty close to each other here in Colorado and got to know each other over some time and become friends. And Beau's a sales leader in the SaaS space. I think one of the fun thing we both geek out a lot is being in SaaS. And almost 20 years, I think now you've been in sales working in some form or another.
In sales, about a dozen years in SaaS, but a lot of time in sales and the customer side as well. So, yeah.
Awesome. And so Beau is currently leading sales at a property management SaaS company. Beau, tell us a little bit more about yourself. Again, super excited to have you here.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. Hi, everybody. Beau Brooks. So I am the VP of Sales at Rentvine. So we are a full-service trust accounting residential property management software. We help property managers, typically working single-family residential homes, and manage their portfolio, doing things like accounting, leasing, maintenance, all those good things, primarily in the United States. And the company's based in Estero, Florida. I'm with Jesse, based here in Colorado. So have the pleasure of getting to know some of the really great salespeople in this space.
Awesome. And a little bit just like background on you, how long have you been leading sales organizations now for?
Yeah, it's been about a dozen years. So I'm one of those rare leaders that I started my career in sales for about 7 years, selling something completely different, long range Learjet medical transport sales, which I've said a few times. But then I switched. I went and got my MBA, and then I went over to the customer side. So I led customer retention, customer experience for about 5 to 6 years, and then got pulled back onto the sales side. And that was just about a year and a half after I went into SaaS. So then for the last 10 to 12 years, a variety of sometimes sales, sometimes customer experience, a lot of times both, and getting to see how you stitch these teams together to drive the right type of value, right? Sales leaders, we have a reputation for jamming a bunch of stuff through the funnel and closing it, and maybe not setting up our partners on the customer side so well, but having managed both of those, I think it gives me a pretty unique perspective on how important that relationship is.
Think that I've seen that. I don't know about you, but I've seen that more and more common today, where it's more of this holistic view and from a leader perspective. And I think you're totally right. Having that both sides of that's just invaluable because it is a lot. I saw this early in my career at one of my first software companies I worked at. Is like it was all about getting the deal in the door, and once it was in, it was like I don't care about this thing anymore. And it was a very much an over promise, under deliver kind of environment. So makes a huge difference.
Yeah. We geek out. I think that's why you and I have so much fun talking about this stuff. I mean, it becomes very much data driven once you start marrying the two sides, where you can identify sales is putting things through and we celebrate these wins, but then the retention looks bad on certain segments. And you start to do the math and realize bringing the sale on actually didn't even make sense and probably wasn't even profitable. So oftentimes cutting some of those activities in sales can be more profitable for the organization. So having that data background or data experience and open to those conversations, being a huge partner with RevOps is incredibly important. And you see that so much more when you own both sides versus just trying to get the deal across the new business line.
That's awesome. So you and I think we were talking 2 or 3 weeks ago. We're geeking out on the AI front. So I'm going to start there today. I mean, we talked a lot about this, and I think we could have probably geeked out for another couple hours and then some. I mean, as you think about where we're at today, knowing what we know is out there right now with AI. I just did a podcast on this last week around agentic. What do you see from a sales lens, both from how you sell, but also from how people buy? How do you see that evolving over the next 3 to 5 years with AI being obviously at the forefront of all of that?
Yeah, we had some fun disagreeing a bit on this. I do think it's going to be big. Like when you talk about what's the next few years look like in the sales and revenue space, AI is a big topic. What that means, I think, is still pretty unclear. There was this I think, big FOMO experience over the last year or two with sales leaders like me trying to find AI products. I know we talk to investors a lot and other companies that are talking a lot about what AI products can we buy or AI software can we bring on to help make us more efficient. And it's been a struggle to find things that have actually been really effective. When it like a lot of the opportunity is in the prospecting space. But the value add that these things bring haven't really proven out, at least from my experience yet, trying out multiple products. There are some tools, HubSpot, Salesforce, they're doing some interesting things that assist the seller. But the other thing I'm noticing is I'm not sure how comfortable yet buyers are with interacting with AI. There's some I don't know if you've seen them, or I think we talked about this. AI agents effectively that will hold conversations, that will do first call discovery, that will get on as like a solution engineer. Well, I think for the most time they work if we can minimize the hallucinations these things have. I'm just not sure if customers are ready to engage with AI yet. I do think that's probably going to change over the next couple of years, or at least we'll get more comfortable. The thing that I'm seeing a lot is companies are not being forthright about their use of AI agents in the experience, which I think is creating a distrust with buyers. And I think if we're more upfront about this stuff, we can turn that more often. But I was just at a conference this week for National Association of Residential Property Managers, and the big topic was AI. But actually what came out was a lot of the AI out there is still Mechanical Turk in the background, offshore agents that are doing what the AI claims to do. So it's not all there, and a lot of this is still machine learning, right? It's not artificial intelligence. So I guess that's my short address on it. But I'd be curious, how does that resonate with what you're seeing? I know you're big on this concept of the interface may go away, right? If a back end database can manage it all, and we just live through interfaces. I don't know. Tell me your side.
Yeah, I mean, I think, when I say 3 to 5 years, I'd say this is where you and I are in agreement. It's probably the only main disagreement is probably like the speed at which of things. But, I think, look, the whole concept we talked about moving away from needing a GUI, for the most part, for reps especially. So I think about when I talk about it from a sales experience, a seller's experience perspective, I don't think that's happening. That might be 5 years. I think it'll get good enough, maybe sooner, but I think 5 years is not out of the picture for a lot of companies, not for all companies, but I think for a lot of companies. I don't think we're that far away from it. I think, the next 3 years, and this is where I think you and I are in 100% agreement. I don't believe right now in AI replacing people. So I give you an example of this. I was on a call. I actually invested in a company 2 years ago, and they were doing actually a lot around the user experience and CS and all of this data, like stuff you would geek out over. And I fell in love with the founder, and I ended up just investing. And then I sat on their advisory board for a number of years, and that they ended up taking that product and kind of, I think it was one of those typical founder like gets excited about something else and kind of moves on. Actually, I think their product they had was really good. They just needed to focus, but they shifted to this, virtual SDR model. And I tested it. I was a very big negative against it. Like, because I just, it's like, I was talking to somebody today about this. You think about autonomous vehicles. So if you look at Tesla today, and I know Tesla is its own topic, but just Tesla from an autonomous driving perspective, their technology is better than an average driver. Like the data shows that. That's not like a Jesse thing. It's literally data, which you and I love. So, but at the end of the day, so then you could make the argument of, okay, why does Tesla not automatically get to do, auto driving? Well, because even though it's better, still people want the idea that all of that responsibility still falls on them, right? There's a comfort level with even if it's 2 times better, if it saves that many more lives, it doesn't matter, right? At the end of the day, it's still a machine and it's a lack of control. And I think that's a good perspective of where we're at today. And so this idea that I'm going to have a virtual SDR be effective, even if it's 95% good, that 5%, to your point, it's a distrust for buyers, right? And it also just gives you that extra vibe. And I also think it actually floods our industries in a lot of negative things as well. Like the more that happens, the more phone calls I'm going to get, which means the more I'm going to ignore my phone, right? So I do think there's some component here where I see the biggest advantage is supplementing, right? So it's like doing a lot of stuff that RevOps has done and does today, but making that faster, right? It's like, how do we get you guys really good lists to call off of to prospect? How do we get really clean data in the system? How do we auto capture more activity information, more notes from meetings? Like all of these things that we're starting to see, like Gong and Clary Copilot or whatever they call it now, like those tools, those are evolving. They're getting better and better. And so I think to me, it's actually in the next 3 years at least, it's more about that. And it's more about leveraging agents in the background. It's almost like a personal assistant. It's like a rep having their own personal assistant. They are still
Oh
doing
yeah.
all of the customer facing work. In my mind, I think good companies will still do that. Will people shift? I don't know. Those are my thoughts on it. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think I generally agree with you. The part that I'm still trying to figure out is if we have this sort of agent come in that's an assistant for every rep out there, the cost for sales is going to go up, which means a couple things, right? A rep either has to deliver more,
More.
right, or we have to sell for more value, or potentially both. And I struggle with that a bit because a lot of the value that reps deliver is the personalization, right? Recognizing the types of questions, asking things that we'll see if an AI can do intuitively and actually personalize it, right? It's building a connection. I'm not a huge fan of the relationship seller. I think every seller is a relationship seller. But the ability to match and mirror, to understand when to interject, ask a question maybe you already know the answer to try and reinforce pain or value. Um, you have to have good recall and understanding of what's going on in a deal to be effective at that. And if AI is going to drive an increase in the number of deals that a rep is managing, that's going to become not exponentially, but it's going to become a lot harder for them to manage a larger pipeline. And I'm worried about a seller's capability to do that effectively, right? So we're going to be at this weird point where the cost is going to go up because the AI supplement will be great, but at the same time, can the sellers manage the volume of information? Actually, the more I've thought about this, I think the seller profile may change meaningfully over the next few years, right? Today, you could be a hero seller, right? And recognize the right deals and close them and hit your number and be good. But if that number has to double or triple because you're expected to manage far more pipeline, meaning sales teams are going to have fewer reps, but they've got to deliver more, you have to be an operator, right? You have to be very detail oriented, process oriented. You've got not only got to be able to follow it, but you've got to quickly recall the details that have been covered so far. And I think some of that works. Like there's some decent tools out there right now that you can prep for meetings, right? Just by asking the GPT, what did we talk about on the last call, and what should I be prepared for on the next call? That stuff will help. But these reps are going to have to be very sharp across the multitude of deals. Depending on the type of sale you're at. I mean, today I think it's reasonable for our sellers to be managing 50 to 70 deals in their pipeline at any given time. If that number's got to go up to like 115, 120, that's going to be really tough to manage. So I'm still figuring out how are we going to close that gap, and do we have the right people to do that? Can we upskill these people to be able to handle that? I don't know. And I haven't seen a lot of tools out there that are thinking through that. Everybody's just very excited at the efficiency and the volume of information that we can put through. But what's the impact that has on the seller's ability to effectively do their job? Otherwise, we just turn into order takers, right? And that's like, I push this on the sales team all the time. If all you're doing is order taking, you're not generating any differentiation from our competitors. The customers are just buying based on features. And sometimes that's okay, but a lot of times you buy based on the outcome it's going to drive, right? Not the features that you're buying. And if we lose that, I don't know that the best products are going to win, which is, I guess, never true in the market anyway. So maybe I'm overthinking it.
I think you have some validity there. I think the reality is I mean, all of us, our skill sets have to continue to evolve. So I think that kind of goes without saying, and I think for sellers as well. But you know, I was talking actually. I wrote an article about this 2 years ago about I was doing a data bake off with vendors, right? So like think about the big vendors, and it came down to two vendors, and if I said their names, you know them very well. And the number one in the data bake off was company A, let's call it. And I'm not gonna rip on them in this call, but they ran a terrible sales process. Like they had the arrogance. Like honestly, they were super arrogant. They like didn't summarize anything. They didn't listen. You name the list. All the things that like you're encouraging your team to do, they didn't do. They won barely, but they lost the deal. Why did they lose the deal? Because the other person listened. They ran
Did those
weekly
things.
meetings with me. They built the relationship. And what does that tell me? That tells me when I buy, exactly to our point at the beginning of this call, they're not just out the door. Like they're not just gone, good luck. Good luck implementing this tool or whatever it is. Like I knew there would be great partners. And I think as we buy, like there's something around that. So I think you're totally right. Like there is a level here where order taking, that loses a lot of its value, I think, ultimately. And maybe, I don't know, I'm going to talk myself out of this. Maybe as AI evolves, like maybe onboarding and enablement isn't as important. And so maybe my opinion of that might change one of these days. But until I think we
Yeah,
see
you could have
that,
done
I
that.
mean, it's still there for sure.
You could do it, yeah, agentically or something like that. Yeah, another one I ran into this week, like one of the softwares we use rolled out AI, basically AI call coaching, right, where you can say, I want you to score a call on these things. The AI will go in, look for certain keywords, score a call based on your scorecard, and then feed that scorecard to the rep. On the surface, that sounds great, but I see a couple of problems in bringing AI into that process. One, as the sales leader, I'm not getting the experience of listening to calls, hearing what customers are saying, trying to identify trends, both in our reps' behaviors on calls and also customer feedback in the market. Um, and I'm also telling my seller, I'm not going to coach your calls anymore. It's all automated. So you read the automated scorecard from the AI and you take your own development more personally because I'm not going to be involved in it as much. And that scares me. Like I've never seen that done well because of human nature. Like you hear sellers complain all the time, I'm not getting any coaching. And I think coaching, from my perspective, is generally perceived as at least one call being graded or scored or coached a week, and then sessions where you're breaking down skills and deal reviews. So if we're taking that stuff out of our engagement with sellers and giving it to the I think we degrade the experience of manager and rep relationship and the accountability they have to each other. Again, it's evolving in a weird way that we're all going to have to figure out.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of obviously unknown, and I think the rate of change. You and I talked about this, like, and I think it was you actually saying this, like, while the technology might actually get ahead of everything, can everybody else actually adopt, at the same rate? And I think that's where a lot of the complexity is going to run in. And then also, I was meeting with one of my prior bosses and mentors. He was a CEO at a company I worked at years ago, and I met with him last week, and he was like, "And at some point, do we get to a point where like utopia is dystopia? Like there's this idea that like everybody's got all the information, they can run the perfect process, and then what is the value then? Like where do all these products come in?" I think we could literally spend a whole session on that alone, but I think there's a lot of unknowns here. I do Obviously this is changing. It's not a question of if it's changing, it's a question of how, to what degree and by when. I think those are probably the biggest questions we
Exactly.
could we could agree on.
Yes.
A little bit along these lines, I want to shift gears a little bit here. Look, you've been doing this for a long time. One of the things I think you and I both align on a lot is learning. Like I think it's one of the things you and I both lean into a lot is this idea of like even our conversations of just, how do we continuously improve? It's not this idea we've reached our pinnacle, or we've done it this way for however long and now we're going to keep doing it. I think there's that evolution. What's something you've been learning recently? Something new that you've been trying?
Yeah, this is a timely question for me. As sales leaders, I think a lot of times, and RevOps leaders, we get focused on specific things and get deep and don't step back as often. Uh, I recently started in my role at Rentvine. Got it crazy to say, fifth time as a VP of sales. I don't think that's a badge of honor, but fifth time starting as VP of sales. And I came into a new role where there's a variety of things that need to be worked on, that need to be improved and changed into coaching and process design. And I've spent a lot of time thinking over the last few months, what's the priority for tackling all these problems, and how should we think about that? I started with the concept of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And almost you have to go through a certain order in human nature to make people comfortable before you can move up a level, and thought about that from the lens of revenue leadership and how do we tackle these. So I've had things like the CRM and how do we change processes to make them more efficient. We've got sales skills and how do we train on skilling. We've got design. It's like sales design, right? Not just on a call, not tactics on a call, but sales process, like building out deal stages, things like that. So there's a variety of things, and um, I had to really think about, okay, I can't tackle this all at once. And if I tackle too much of it at once, I'm going to confuse the sellers. We're going to create a bunch of chaos through change. And I don't want to do that because we're private equity backed. We have to continue to grow and do it quickly and efficiently. So I settled on what I thought was the right hierarchy, or at least a starting point. I posted on LinkedIn. It was some good discussion and thought provoking arguments from others around what things should be in there, shouldn't be in there. But what I settled on is the base layer is CRM process and CRM hygiene, right? Because we had a bit of a messy CRM that needed to get cleaned up. And as I thought about the why, like if we're going to get really good and really efficient at generating more pipeline, whether it's through marketing, through outbound, and put more into the sales process, if we've got a poorly designed process or it's poorly executed, it's just going to get lost in the abyss of deals, right? And I was very worried about that. So we started at that base layer of designing what do we want the CRM to look like, what things are important, and how can we design it better to assist the seller in doing the best that they can. Like we talked about on the last call, there's a ton that we expect out of a seller at the end of a call and in between calls and in emails, in documenting in the system and doing it effectively. So rather than being that sales leader and my partner in RevOps of hammering the team on you need to do better, how can we design the system to assist them, right? Things like deal stage requirements and setting up the best practice guides of what to do in each phase, building out playbooks. That's that base layer. And then the next thing we did, and we could probably talk about this for hours, but next thing we did was a bit more on base sales tactics. So the way we approach that, and again, this is my RevOps mind as the VP of sales coming in, is we put together a scoring rubric of here's what a good call looks like. And it was pretty foundational. I don't want to say basic, but fairly basic. Things like, we selected 6 things, right? Setting on a call, setting an agenda, doing good discovery, running a solid demo. And that means open-ended questions. That means getting good information on your demo, objection handling, pricing, and next steps. And we set out exactly what does good look like in each of those, and then started to run some of the call coaching sessions, some of the grading of calls that way to get the foundation set, right? That we're doing the right things before we then move into some of the more technical pieces around second level call strategies, like deeper negotiation, the Chris Voss type stuff, where you're asking reversal questions, Sandler tactics of maybe pushing a seller away using a pendulum sale. But it's been a lot of thinking around how do I move up this, and I still don't think I've got it nailed. There's a lot of things around hiring and recruiting and talent development that need to be layered in there somehow. But those are the few things. Maybe having laid out those few things. And does anything stick out that I missed, or have you dealt with a situation like that yourself? Like this has been a discovery again for me as a sales leader the last few months.
I mean, I think what I like about your approach again is that the tension we have to feel, right? I feel the same thing of around a couple of things: time to value, change, and the pain that changes, and potential disruption that is to organizations. And then I think focus, because I think that's one of the things that everybody wants everything, right? And you could go to 5 different people across your organization and ask them what they think is the most important thing to get fixed, and all of them will pretty much say probably maybe some of the same overlap, but for the most part, it's probably all different things. Right. And so I like the focus behind it. I think it's really good. I think it's interesting. I think if I asked 10, revenue leaders, I'd be curious how many would actually say kind of the operational end of that first. Like, I think that's an interesting one. Obviously, as somebody who does RevOps, it's music in my ears, and I see the value behind it. It's interesting though, because I do think there's a lot of sales leaders out there who would just say, like, just go sell. Like, it's kind of the revenue cures all, that mentality. And I think that's a short-term mentality. And I think, again, and I get it to some degree, you're new into sales, you're PE backed, or my company's VC backed. Like, we have pressure, we have things we have to answer to. And so there's this idea, but also there's another idea of like, well, we got to do both, right? We kind of gotta, it's like building the ship while we're driving the ship, or building the plane while we're flying the plane, whatever the analogy you want to use is. So, but I agree with you, because if you look at it, I was on a call actually today with a company. I got cold called. I pick up 2 cold
Good for
calls
you
a
for
month.
taking the call.
I take two cold calls a month, and I'll do 1 to 2 meetings max a month. Again, back to learning. I just want to know what's going on. And this company was all about uh, a lead leakage. So like how much leads come into the pipeline, and essentially what happened, all that money we spent to get them in there. And it's a big problem. Like it's a huge problem. And to your point, I think your example is exactly that, which is like, we don't have these underlying things in place. We can do all the right things, and even then we're not going to ever actually get this ship moving, at a good pace. Like we might still limp along and run out of coal every once. I'm going to use a terrible analogy here, but like versus this steady, consistency behind it, I think is really big. So I would agree with you. I would say it's a different perspective than what I'm used to hearing. I thought the post you put on there was really good. I'll make sure I shared the link here. But I thought that was really insightful of how you thought about it. And to your point, like as with anything, we can always continue to tweak things. But I don't think you missed anything within there. I think what I also like, again, weirdly enough, is we talk about people and process, like you get the system thing right, to where it's, to your point, like helping them, not a big hindrance. Like that's the thing I hear a lot of times. I was on a call last week, and it was, the reps complaining about all the stuff they had to put in the system. But the way I view it is like when I was a rep, if I didn't have it in there, I couldn't keep track of 60 deals. Like you just mentioned 60 deals. We mentioned possibly going to 100. And like, there's no way you can keep that all up here, right? It's just not possible. I get the, like, we've got to make systems, easy and accessible, but to me, it actually helped me manage things effectively. And I think it comes back to like skill set talent of, maybe the relationship seller versus the operationally minded seller, which not this, I mean, I've seen relationship sellers crush, but they have a Rolodex, right? Like generally that's the,
Right.
like the not the norm, right? That's normally like the outlier is the relationship seller. You have a lot of people that say the relationship sellers, but they're not consistent. Like, and we'll talk about that here in a bit. Anyways, I'm digressing a little bit, but so I would completely agree with you. And I think going into some of those other fundamentals, like the Chris Voss thing, I think that actually within sales is one of the more, it's like how you ask questions and how you phrase things. I actually think that back to like where AI, I think is, right now, at least not anywhere near it, is in some of those, nuanced capabilities. And I think that's where the power of being a really good sales rep comes in.
Yeah, and your comment, I actually don't think a lot of, at least VPs of sales, I know RevOps is big on this stuff, but VPs of sales, I don't think it's super common to default to process and structure because it's probably harder and it's not our natural state, right? We like to be on calls and selling. But I have taken, especially at Rentvine, but in other roles, I've taken the opposite approach. Like if I just get on calls and start trying to hero deals, that's not helping anybody but me. Like my job is to teach the seller, prepare the sellers to be effective over and over and over, ideally without me there. And like the byproducts of getting the system clean, like it's barely been 2 months since I've started. We now have pretty clean close lost reporting that we can feed to the product team that says we're losing deals. Here's the reasons, and here's the revenue that was lost based on that. So they can make quantitatively driven decisions on what are we going to put on the roadmap, what are we going to build. That was never there before. It was more of kind of like finger in the wind, like, all right, the wind's blowing this way, we'll change this. So the byproducts of doing it this way, man, are so much more powerful. And like we try and find ways to make it fun. Like I mentioned, we've got this call scoring rubric on those 6 things. Like that seems a bit big brothery at first to the team. And combining that with like if some of your listeners try it, like we do a film review every other week where together as a sales team, we just did it this morning. We listen to a call together, we break it up at the various points in a call, and we debrief what happened, how did that go, we missed a question here, or you just discovered this piece of information in your conversation. What do you change now in your demo because you now have that? And we're constantly trying to improve. But then we layer in, like right now we're doing a March Madness bracket where each rep, they've got head-to-head matchups against the team, and we use that scoring rubric to score the calls. The rep that does better kind of moves down the bracket, and we're going to end up with the champion. So it's a fun way. I'm happy to share. You can send out the bracket example that we're using, but it makes it more fun for the sellers to engage in skill improvement rather than just I need to do this because I'm told to, right? But man, this stuff is so powerful, having measurement capabilities once you get it in place that just weren't there before, that don't come if you're just going to hero deals.
I mean, I think
maybe it's the sales leaders. It's the sales leaders that are going to have to change. Back to the very beginning of our conversation. If the standard sales leader is not thinking about process, but what we're saying here is the evolution that's going to happen in 3 to 5 years in sales is fundamentally about being able to manage a heavier process. Maybe the profile of sales leader is what's going to have to change a lot over the next few years. I should be thinking about that to make sure I've got everything that I need.
It's an interesting call. I haven't thought about that either. So I like the way you phrase that. I want to double click on this March Madness thing and gamification. Like, talk to me a little bit. What are you doing there, and how, like, where did this come from? Because I love this. My last company, I tried to roll out something similar, and I would say you kind of had the legacy mentality of like, we don't need to gamify things. Like, we're just sales reps. We can do the things. But I'd love to know kind of where this came out of and what you're doing in that realm right now.
Yeah, so this is probably the third time I think I've run a contest like this around March Madness, because everybody knows what March Madness is, at least in the US. And so it creates a fun environment, and I push this out to the entire company. So everybody sees the bracket, the team feels a good amount of pressure of like, I need to do my best because the results are going to show up. But we also have fun with it, and it's very public. Like, we tell you, here's exactly how we're going to score the calls, right? If you don't set an agenda where you tell the customer you are going to ask for their business at the end of the call, if it's a good fit, you're going to get docked a point. So they know black and white for the most part how it's going to be graded, which makes it much easier. But then they make it fun, and they start to do the things. I've seen the evolution just in 3 weeks of doing this, of how the team is tackling calls in the way that we need to. I've been thinking a ton around this gamification stuff lately, and really even personally. So I've started to redo some of the thought around habit. Kind of as a person, I am pretty habit driven and type A, but I've reverted back to some of my old habits. So I fill out a daily form every day over the last like 3 months of things that I want to make sure I do. And they're simple stuff. But the two that I've been doing recently, one is Duolingo, studying French every day. And the other one is chess. There's like 15 things on there, but I'll call those two out. And the revelation that I had recently. So chess is a good example. I played a lot of chess growing up. I love playing chess. But I have a very addictive personality. So what I know about myself is I'll start playing chess, I'll play a ton, and then I'll kind of get burned out and I won't do it for a couple of years again. But what the chess app, chess.com app has taught me is there's a streak on there. I can go in, play the daily puzzle every day, maybe play a game or do some of their puzzles, but I'm limited on how much I can do if I don't pay for the app. And I had this moment where I was like, oh man, I want to do some more today. Maybe I should just pay for the app. But what I think I've reflected on personally is if I pay for the app, my addictive personality is going to go super fast into doing a bunch. I'm going to burn out and I'm not going to do it again. So there's this throttling mechanism behind the streak is getting me in there every day. But the throttling mechanism, I mean, chess.com is probably going to change this or something, but of saying like, you know what, I'm not going to pay for this because I want to throttle myself on how much I'm going to use this. And the streak element to that, like, which I don't think, at least from my perspective, I've never done a good job in sales with the teams around this, is there's definitely an element of I want to do this every day to maintain the accountability and the habit behind it. So I mentioned trying to make the process easier for the sellers to stay compliant and do the right things. Well, I know we've talked about this. There's a few things on a deal that I think are non-negotiables, right? You always need to have a close date in the future. After stage one, you always need to have pricing listed. You need to have an accurate close date. You need to have a next steps date. These things are non-negotiables, but reps are busy. They've got 50 to 70 deals in their pipeline, so they can miss things. They're working a deal effectively, but the close date passes by a couple of days. Well, in the past, I've taken the approach of getting on the rep, like, come on, you need to update the close date. Obviously, it's passed. Why didn't you think about this? Rather, I'm now reversing that mentality and saying, like, so every day I'm sending out an automated report from the CRM saying, like, hey, here's the deals that have slipped. You can easily click on them and update it right there. So they're back in compliance and you're more on top of them. So taking that approach of let me assist you in maintaining a streak than coming down on you because you didn't complete a streak. And by streak, I mean, like, how many days, I was thinking about this today, actually, how many days can you not show up on the report? Like, your streak is, hey, my pipeline has been in complete compliance for 5 straight days. Right. And we start to think about those. So this like gamification and streak stuff has been front of mind because it's this balance of like, how do you drive people to do the right activities every day, but not create a situation where they burn themselves out by pursuing the streak heavily. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. And I was thinking about, I have an app called Headspace. You ever heard of this app?
Oh yeah.
So I pay for this
I'm a
app.
multi-time failure at mindfulness.
So Headspace, like before you can access, like for example, LinkedIn. I want to be on LinkedIn more often, so I allow myself 9 times a day. The max I can be on it is at 10 minutes at a time, and I have to breathe for 15 seconds. So like that's a low bar. That's actually a pretty low bar example. Instagram, I don't want to be on very much, and so like I noticed that my usage was higher than I wanted, so I limited it to 3 times a day. I have to do 45 seconds of breathing, and the max I can be on Instagram, I think, was like 15 minutes because I'm not on there as frequently, and it's a lot more of a barrier, right? So I think about like the throttle piece of it. But on the like the gamification side, I agree with you. And I actually think I love the March Madness thing. I mean, I just have seen like one of the things that I think we forget about a lot of times is that people in sales like sales because it's competitive. And like I remember when I was on the desk, like I started out my career I was a data analyst first, and then I left data because I had a mentor say like you should go learn sales, like it will help you. And it was the best piece of advice I ever got. Like the skill sets I built in sales, I've used. I mean, I use more today, I would say, in my role as RevOps leader than I would even did in sales in a large degree because a lot of what I'm doing is like change management behind that. But the thing that I loved on the desk was like very clear of where do I stand, and I would not leave that desk until I was on that leaderboard, like day in day out, consistently on that leaderboard. And like there was something fun about that, and it wasn't this like you still had to deliver bookings. Like a lot of times you hear people be like, well, activity doesn't matter, bookings only matter. True, to a degree, but also activity
Yeah.
drives bookings. Like everybody on the activity leaderboard was also on the, like consistently. You might have the person once a quarter get the Bluebird deal that they like woke up every day at 11 a.m. and worked on one relationship for a year and closed $1 million deal. Like you have those reps. Like let's call it what it is. Those stories are out there, but that's not consistent. Like, and I think you would
Yeah.
agree as a sales leader, we're looking for consistency in reps, right? And I think that's where whatever we can do to help people, because I think like at this point in our careers, I don't know about you, like my brain helped get me to where I am, but today like what keeps me here is discipline and consistency. Like those are the two things that I think about the most, is just like how do I show up every day to win the day, win the week, win the month, win the quarter, right? Like it's very much ingrained in my head of like around that. I don't know how many people are good at doing that. I think a lot of people, one week, you see this a lot with sellers, like
Yeah.
one week they generate a lot of pipeline, then they don't work. Then they maybe generate a little bit more pipeline, then they don't work for 2 weeks. I mean, it's not to say they don't work, but you know what I'm saying? Like, so
I know
whatever
it's
we
up
can do
crash,
to,
up crash.
right? I don't know. So that's my perspective on it. I think there's
I,
something to that as well.
I think there's something big on this. Like you have to know well what your KPIs are and expectations in order to even create gamification, right? So you don't start with how do I want to gamify this? How do I gamify it? It's what are the standards? And then how can I put some fun and enjoyment around those standards? That's a big disconnect. And having one and the other is super helpful. Like, what are the things that I learned this years ago when Salesforce tried to sell me as a buyer. Once the demo got done, and it was coming up, we were a couple weeks away from the end of the quarter, and the Salesforce director called me. I was VP sales, called me every day for like 10 days, checking in, making sure I was holding up my end of the bargain, making progress. And a lot of people say like, man, that's annoying. Like, doesn't that frustrate you because he was bothering you so much? And I would have probably said yes before I went through the experience, but I was busy. I had so much other stuff going on. It was not front of mind, but every day him touching base with me reminded me that I needed to make progress on my side in order, because I needed the product. I wanted to help him hit his number for the quarter. And it was on me to get some things done. And I took away from that, which I'm now instilling in my sellers. You think you are going to be annoying to a buyer if you're following up regularly. But in reality, what you're doing is helping the buyer get to the finish line, right? People don't buy software very often. And also, they get lost in everything else that's going on during the buying process. So as sellers, a part of that is our job to be very consistent and often very frequent in front of them. That's something like that activity and process stuff you're talking about. It's tough to dictate. Like, yeah, you got to call the buyer every day for 10 days after you deliver pricing. But if we start to instill some of these things and then do the analysis that says, look, when you do this, here's the close rate. Sellers are happy when they're making revenue, and that's something that we've seen. So we've been doing some of the gamification and playing, but also having the expectations, and then also coaching the reps like on their follow up. make it super easy to buy. Like we're a pretty high velocity, pretty short deal cycle motion. So SMB, lower mid market. There's been a few times where we make the pricing follow up very short. Here's my recommendation. If you want to move forward, just respond yes, and I'll send you over the contract. And I can't tell you how many times the reps are coming to me saying, this is working. Like I'm just making it very easy for them to pull the trigger, where in the past, I was telling them to come back with questions and I was sending them a 15-page proposal. And they almost get paralysis as a buyer because they don't know what to do next and they feel the pressure of having to make a decision. Whereas if you're clear, like, we have talked about this, I know what's going on in your business, here's the recommendation, let's go. They're just like, yeah, I want to do it. So it's this whole like setting the process and expectations, gamifying it so they have fun with learning the process, and then what's the word I'm looking for? Like iterating on the frequency and the design of the outreach, like the activity stuff, I think does matter. Like as much as people say it doesn't, it's a big part of this. So all these things play together from a process perspective is a lot of what I've been learning. So figured out how you make that fun and how we play this gamification streak stuff, but not overdoing it, is very big in my mind right now.
I love it. And I think, the company A and B example I talked about earlier, where company B won out over company's A, better product, not a lot better, but still better product. That rep, what they did every week was they'd end the call 4 minutes early. So they were always respectful of my time, which was really big, like a huge pet peeve of mine when reps try to take more of my time. But he would say, hey, Kate, Jesse, I'd like to end right now. What's your next Wednesday look like? We were every Wednesday. Next Wednesday, what time works for you? And he's like, hey, look, if we don't need the call, no worries. We'll hop on for 2 seconds. We'll get off. And to your point, it wasn't actually a nuisance for me. Like I wanted to do the deal. Like there's a reason I reached out. There's a reason I wanted to start this bake off. To your point, I was busy. And so it was like one of 1,700 million things I was doing. He kept me on track. Like it was just this and sometimes we'd only call and be like, dude, I don't have anything. Do you have anything from this week? Am I missing? Am I supposed to be doing anything right now? Oh shoot, I forgot to get you XYZ. It was so valuable. And so I completely agree with you. And I think back to the gamification side of it, I think you're exactly right. It's how you do it. I think a lot of times we think of activity tracking as it's all about accountability and trying to fire people. And I think, don't get me wrong, let's call it what it is. There is some validity to that, but that is typically a last resort. And I think we use that as an excuse to not do something versus this idea again of playing to all of us like competition. Like there's a reason we are in this space. Like we like to win. I hope so. Like if you don't like to win, probably not the right industry to be in, right? And so how do we get that, get to really encourage that in people and make it fun to where it's not about this, big brother accountability. It's more about, being the best and pushing yourself to be consistent yourself. And how do you make yourself better within it?
Yeah. We see that a lot in the film reviews. So in full transparency, I stole this from Mark Robert, former CRO from HubSpot, where every time we start doing this, I start doing this at a new company, all the feedback, anytime I stop the call is, this is going great, or you did a really great job, or I really like how they are scared to give constructive feedback to each other because we live in this culture where we're afraid to be honest, or we're afraid to help people get better. But if as leaders, as peers, as reps, if our goal is to get better and do the best, we've got to have the best of intentions, right? And I think what gets forgotten is, as sales leaders, I need all of my reps to succeed, right? In order for me to succeed and the team to succeed, I need them to be successful. So if I'm starting from there, and my feedback, my coaching, my expectations on things like activities, if that comes from a place of, I'm trying to help you get better, I'm trying to help you be successful, hopefully that flows through to the right type of engagement with the team versus that big brother approach or them feeling threatened. That's what I'm constantly trying to avoid. And and instill in the team, let's give each other very direct feedback. Let's share what could have gone better, what did go well, but what maybe the opportunities were. I mean, it's definitely a muscle that the team's got to learn.
There's a book I often talk about, and it's one of the principles I lead by, called Radical Candor. If you've ever read that book, and I think it's all about that, right? It's all about the heart behind your feedback. What's the heart, the posture of it. I think it's the same thing in this. It's the heart behind it is not out of a place of I want you to fail. I'm looking for ways to, it's the heart is no, I want us all to succeed here. And, I think that's the beautiful thing about that type of approach is it's very much I actually care enough about you to provide feedback to you to help you make yourself better. Would you rather
Yeah.
that or me lie to you and then you're not bettering yourself each day? And I think when you get to that point, it's just a different posture behind it.
Yeah, there's an awesome story that I tell regularly from that book where Kim Scott used to work at Google for Sheryl Sandberg, and she was kind of over the ad business. I'm sure you know the story, but for your listeners, they walked out of a meeting, and Sheryl turned to Kim, who Sheryl was her boss, and said, "How do you think that meeting went?" And Kim said, "I think it went pretty well. We got approval for the funding, so we get to launch this like kind of new business line." And she said, "How do you think it went?" And Sheryl said, "You have to stop saying like you," and she's like, "Oh yeah, I get it. I know I need to work on them." She's like, "No, no, no, you're not hearing me. You sounded stupid by how much you said and it stopped Kim in her tracks. And Cheryl was like, "Look, I want to make you better. You did get the funding and you got the deal, but in order for you to continue leveling up, like everything matters." And she did it from a place of, "I care so much about you that I want you to get better, man." And that just gives me goosebumps whenever I hear her tell that story, because that's the level of leadership we should have. We care so much that we're willing to give that type of feedback to help somebody get better, not hold it in because we're too afraid it's going to hurt their feelings. Like those type of relationships we need with our teams.
Very true. And actually, I love that story. Last question here, and be mindful of time. And I think it ties into a lot of what we're talking about. Like when you look at reps through the years, what would you say like three-ish things that you've consistently seen over time, like are the biggest leading indicators of a successful rep? Like, and I think it's probably a lot of what we talked about today, but I'd be really curious your view on it.
Yeah, there's the natural answers like storyteller, natural curiosity, but some like creative. Some of the things that have really started to rise to the top are there's some of the intangibles you can coach, but I love it when I can find them. And it's things like matching and mirroring. When they're on a call with a customer or on a phone with a customer, they pace at the same place, they come from the same tone. Now there's coaching out there where you can change the tone throughout the call. But if you don't meet a buyer where they're at, it's going to be very hard for you to create a level of trust with them that they will share objections or give you honest feedback. So I've tried to find ways to identify that in interviews where like I will either sit back or lean forward or change my tone or come in with a way to see if I can identify, do they naturally see it and can they change? For some people it's inherent, some people but you could definitely coach it. So that's one thing. The other thing I tried to test for is like resilience in a sales process, and that's typically when they get stunned or they're dealing with a tough buyer, because that's not easy and it's really hard to test for in interviews. But I've had to get creative with this over the years. By asking really hard questions. Like the way I learned this is when I interviewed for a job years ago on the retention side. I was in an interview. It was going really well. This was with the head of the customer retention marketing team. And he said, you're either really good at your job or you're absolutely full of shit. And I'm trying to figure out which it is. And I was like, oh my gosh. And it like stunned me. But I remember that moment, like, how do I deal with this? And I've tried to carry that through of like, all right, I want to try and stun you in an interview to see how you react. Because interviews are usually very cordial and polite. Like you do ask situational questions. But what happens if I throw you off balance? Like, how are you going to come back from that? Because if you can't do it with me, you're going to have a hard time doing it with a buyer. So that's another one that I really try and look for. And then the third one, it does go back to what we already talked about, detail oriented, because I think that's becoming so much more important in the sales process. Like, how are you going to handle your CRM? Like, trying to suss out examples of it. So those are three additional things. You still have to be naturally curious. Like, you still have to have a level of either hustle or charisma. You still have to be a good storyteller. Those are the basics. But those other things I've started to look for a lot more, because that's what's separating the good from the bad in sales right now.
I like it. We at my current company, we've got this recruiting firm we work with, and one of the things they've taught me, and I love it, like it's like I will take this to every company I do now, is we wrap up an interview 5 minutes early, and we tell the candidates to turn their camera off, turn their microphone off, and sit back and act like we don't even know they're there, and we're going to talk about feedback right in front of them. So we do live feedback, and we'll start generally I try to start with a few positives, then I'll go negatives, and then I'll try to do a positive. But at the end of the day, like, we then ask them back on and we say, like, how was that for you? And we give them a chance to overcome objections. And like, I'm a pretty direct person. So to your point, like some of the things you're saying is like, exactly what that person said to you. It was like, I don't know if I really believe you, like, or the way you answered this question, like, it didn't really settle with me. And it's interesting. I had an interview this last week where the guy looked at me and I gave a lot of difficult feedback, like a lot. And he just got back on and he said, yeah, it's all true. And then like that ended the interview, and I was like, that was the worst interview. But then I've had other ones where like I've given like really hard feedback, and they've sat there and overcome objections, and like, and a lot of it was like I misunderstood or I didn't see the perspective,
Mm.
and then it also exactly taught me, what that is. So it's an interesting getting to that. How do you do that well? I don't know. It's just something I thought about is like, getting to that feedback point. Weirdly enough, also has that effect because it puts people back on this like, oh, because to your point, people are not used to getting feedback like that. That's not a common thing in a process of interviewing.
Mm-hmm. But it happens all the time in sales. Like you get told no all the time. Buyers will throw you for a loop. How do you respond if somebody says like, yeah, you were right on that. That is something I need to work on. And here's how I'm going to focus on it. How do you take a response like that?
I mean, I think that's good. It's like, how do they deliver that? And how much awareness is actually in it? Was it an agreement just to agree and, placate, or was it,
right?
was there actually like they thought about it? Like, and again, I think that comes back to like, how well can you read somebody? And I think part of that's like, you're doing visual cues, right? A lot of communication's nonverbal within it as well. So I think all of those things play a role, and none of it's perfect, but I mean, I've gotten a lot more out of that feedback loop afterwards than I ever like. Hey, I like it for the candidate because I think as somebody who's gone through hiring processes, you get out of that interview and you're like, man, I thought that went well, and then it clearly didn't because you didn't
no
get the
idea.
next round. So part of it's like they invested the time. It's like I'm willing to give them that back, like at the very least. And also it goes into my leadership style around radical candor. Like if they can't handle feedback, they definitely should not work in my team. Like it's just so central to what we do. But I think more of it than anything I've found more recently is just around like watching their reaction and how do they deal with that? Because not just sales, but even in RevOps, like we deal a lot with changing of priorities, or people don't like stuff. Like you very rarely in my role hear the good. It's always like, this quote isn't working right and we need this out by yesterday and we're really upset that, it's like, or the system's broken, and it's always broken, and it's really like 5% of the time things aren't working right, which, but that's what we deal with. And so if you can't handle that, especially in a startup environment, it's probably not a good fit for you as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like that. I'm gonna have to try that.
So, well, man, this has been fun. I'm glad we got to go into some of these topics. And for those of you listening, if you haven't followed Beau, check him out on LinkedIn. He's always got some good content. I think you do some of the best of laying out like actual practical steps. So I really appreciate seeing a lot of. You had a post this week. I was like, oh, it's actually really well laid out. So follow him. If you haven't subscribe to the podcast, feel free to check it out. But again, really appreciate having you on today.
Great to see you, Jesse.
Awesome. Thanks again, man. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate you.
Thanks for joining us today on RevOps Revolution with Jesse Morris. Before you go, you know what to do. Go hit subscribe on your favorite podcast player app so you don't miss a future episode. And while you're at it, tell a friend about the show. Here's to the revolution.